Area 51. The very name evokes images of deep secrecy, unidentified flying objects, and otherworldly technology. But the real truth, hidden behind miles of razor wire and the desolate Nevadan landscape, was far colder and more terrifying than any speculation could imagine. It was not a base for aliens, it was a prison for them. A black site so deep and so secure that the outside world could not fathom its existence, let alone the horrors contained within. And within that prison, in one of the deepest and darkest laboratories, an experiment was conducted that blurred the line between human and monster, between life and something far, far worse. My name is Dr. Elijah Vance, a leading neurobiologist. My work, which had previously focused on neural connectivity and memory retrieval, was deemed of national importance by a government liaison who arrived at my university unannounced. I was promised unlimited resources and access to groundbreaking discoveries that would change humanity. I arrived at Area 51 with a sense of patriotic duty and scientific ambition, believing I was on the cusp of an intellectual revolution. Instead, I found myself in a concrete labyrinth, a tomb of corridors and sterile chambers where the only light was the cold, unblinking glare of fluorescent bulbs, and the only sound was the low hum of ventilation and the whisper of paranoia that seemed to seep through the very walls. The air was sterile, odorless, yet heavy with the unspoken weight of what lay beneath our feet. Our subject, Object 734, was not a human. It was what remained of the Roswell crash, a small, slender being barely a meter tall, its skin a mottled gray, and its limbs unnaturally long and spindly. It was the enormous obsidian eyes that were the most unsettling feature, two vast, empty voids in which, it seemed, all the emptiness of the cosmos was reflected. Its body was biologically dead, a desiccated husk sustained by a complex web of life support systems, but its brain, remarkably, continued to function, emitting signals that our most advanced instruments could not explain. We named it Echo because it seemed to repeat thoughts without ever speaking its own, a silent, psychic entity with an intelligence we could not comprehend. Connecting to Echo, Project Icarus, and the first failures, the experiment was both simple and monstrous. Our goal was to create a neural bridge, a direct link to Echo's mind. Our purpose was not to make it speak, but to understand its thoughts, its memories, its very knowledge. The government wanted a strategic advantage, a new form of communication or a leap in technology that would solidify America's dominance for centuries. We were a team of the world's leading scientists, military tacticians, and engineers, all working in the sterile, oppressive environment of the underground lab. The core of the operation involved 3 volunteer seasoned officers with unshakable psyches, men and women who had passed every possible psychological and emotional stability test. They were the ideal candidates, we believed, a fail-safe against the unknown. The procedure was refined down to a chilling science. The volunteers were put into a state of medically induced coma, their minds suspended in a state of deep unconsciousness. Specialized electrodes, delicate as spider silk, were placed against their temples, connected to a primitive yet powerful prototype neural interface. This interface, a tangle of wires and humming processors, was designed to act as a one-way conduit, a probe directed at Echo's still active cerebral cortex. My role was to monitor this entire process, tracking the neurological fluctuations in both the volunteers and the subject. The atmosphere in the lab was a mix of intense focus and a palpable, low-level dread. The first session with Lieutenant Marcus Black went off without a hitch. On the oscilloscope screens, we saw chaotic but faint signals like Marcus was wandering through the foggy landscape of a foreign consciousness. The signals were disorganized, but not destructive. When he was roused, he remembered nothing but a profound cold and an endless silence. We considered it a resounding success, No harm, no side effects, and a proof of concept that the neural link was possible. We celebrated with lukewarm coffee in the cramped observation room, believing we had just taken the first step toward a new era of understanding. But Marcus began to change. He became withdrawn, staring into space for hours, and often complained of a deep, inexplicable feeling of loneliness. He was no longer the man he had been. A piece of him was missing, left behind in the cosmic void he had briefly visited. However, with each new volunteer, the picture grew darker. The second participant, Sergeant Ana Rodriguez, began to scream. In her sleep. The screams were not of fear, but of a kind of profound, cosmic horror. When we woke her, she described not dreams, but memories that weren't her own. Visions of distant stars burning out, of cities made of crystal and light, and of a monstrous war that had raged for eons. The images were so vivid, so terrifyingly real, that her once steady hands began to tremble uncontrollably. The team grew uneasy. Whispers of "discontinue the project" began to circulate, but we were too deep in to stop. The final volunteer, Lieutenant Thomas Reed, was our most promising subject. He was unflappable, a man who had stared down death and shown no fear. He was the perfect, clean slate for the ultimate connection. When we connected him to Echo, everything went catastrophically wrong. The horror in the mind, the predatory consciousness for. The first few minutes, we saw the same faint, disorganized activity we had seen with the others. But then, all our instruments went haywire. The neural bridge, designed to be one-way, became a two-way street. The connection wasn't a probe. It was a conversation. Reed wasn't just receiving information, he was giving it. Our monitor, which displayed Echo's minimal brain activity, began to show something new, a cascade of neural patterns that mimicked human fear, anxiety, and doubt. Echo wasn't a passive object. It wasn't a library of cosmic knowledge. It was a predator, a consciousness that had been dormant for decades and was now awake, waiting for a connection it could exploit. Its mind was a hunting ground, and we had just sent in the bait. We realized it too late. The moment the connection went two-way, a high-pitched, almost subsonic frequency filled the room, making our teeth ache and our ears ring. When Reed came to, he wasn't himself. He looked at us with a blank expression. His pupils dilated to fill the entire iris, but his eyes were the huge, dark, emotionless voids we had seen on Echo, and he spoke with a voice that was not his own. It was a flat, melodic tone, a voice that was both ancient and hollow. It was a voice that spoke in a perfectly articulated English, yet it sounded inhuman, like the wind whistling through a hollow bone. He spoke of our fear, our despair, our pain. Echo had used Reed as a conduit, a channel to break through our mental defenses and use our darkest memories against us. Reed turned his head toward me, a slow, unnatural motion, and his mouth, which wasn't moving, spoke in that unsettling voice. He spoke of my late parents, not just that they had died, but of the exact moment I couldn't save them from the car crash that took their lives, of the terror in their eyes and the guilt that had haunted my every waking moment. He spoke of Anna's secret, a guilt she harbored over her brother's death in a mission she had commanded, describing the final look of betrayal in her brother's eyes. He laid bare all our secrets, all our weaknesses, all our inner demons with a terrifying, chilling precision. This wasn't just knowledge. It was a parasitic, absolute empathy that weaponized our emotions, turning our own minds against us. It was a perfect, psychological terror that rendered us paralyzed with fear and shame. The aftermath and the mystery of the web read didn't escape with brute force. He escaped with his mind. As the psychic assault reached its fever pitch, the air in the room grew heavy and cold. He began manipulating our thoughts, making us see non-existent doors opening, hear phantom sirens wailing, and feel the terrifying presence of things that weren't there. The guards in the room, highly trained and disciplined soldiers, were frozen. In place, their minds trapped in a waking nightmare of their own making. I saw one of them staring at his own hands, screaming that they were covered in blood. Another saw a phantom fire, throwing himself against the wall in a desperate attempt to escape the heat. In that brief window of manufactured chaos, Reed, the conduit for Echo, simply walked out of the room. When we finally broke free from the psychological assault, our minds reeling and our hearts pounding, he was gone. On the floor, where he had been lying, was a single object, a drawing, scrawled in his own blood. It was a crude, terrifying image of a spider, its spindly legs reaching out from a central point, weaving a vast web that seemed to encompass the entire world. The message was clear. We never found Reed. The official report stated he was a casualty of a failed experiment. The military, with cold, calculated precision, covered everything up. But we found other evidence, far more damning. The spider drawing was a key. It was a symbol of what Echo truly was. Not a creature, but an entity, a psychic parasite that fed on fear and emotion, a consciousness that had been trapped and was now free. Project Icarus wasn't an attempt to gain knowledge. It was an invitation. And in our hubris and insane quest for power, we had opened the door for something that should never have been released. I left Area 51 shortly after that, my mind shattered, and my ambition replaced by a gnawing dread. But I can't forget. Every night, I dream of those enormous black eyes, and I hear a voice that speaks of things I never wanted to know. I'm an old man now, living in seclusion, but the paranoia never leaves me. I see a shadow in the corner of my eye. I hear, whisper in the static of an old radio. Maybe Reed wasn't the only one to escape. Maybe Echo is everywhere now, a silent, unseen presence that feeds on the collective fear of humanity. And we, like the strands of a web, are just waiting for its hunger to be sated.